This programme was produced at and first aired on MPR, Manawatu People's Radio, with support from New Zealand On Air. Ka pai Irarangi Tamotu, MPR.
Kia ora and welcome to Reserved Recommendations, a show about problematic faves, great trash, difficult art, and our complex relationship with art and entertainment. My name's Hugh, I'm the host, and I'd like to put in a very mild content warning for this show as a whole. Sometimes our recommendations on this show are reserved just because the thing that we're discussing is in some way not good. But sometimes there are aspects to the art or artist that may be confronting for some people. Read the episode descriptions for more information and do be aware of your listening environment. Good evening and welcome. This is Reserved Recommendations, a show about great trash, difficult art, sometimes confrontational relationships with art. This time around, I am joined by Matt Sanko. How's it going, Matt?
It's going great today, Hugh. Yeah.
Fantastic. I suppose some people probably listen to this exclusively on the podcast, so I should explain this is also a radio show that goes out at like 9 p.m. at night, which is why I sometimes call it the evening, regardless of what is actually going on in the recording. However, all of that nonsense aside, the reason that you wanted to come on and have a talk on the show was that there's this whole music scene and attendant kind of culture, musical culture, which I'm just learning about now. Kind of from, would you say, like the late 80s through early to mid 90s in Palmerston North?
Yeah, it started building up a head of steam, probably with a place called Snail Clamps, which was slightly before my time, though lots of my friends talk about it still to this day. And that was run by the guys who were in the Skeptics, and they moved on to bigger cities and large record labels. But that's kind of where original music in Palmerston North really started to take off, and I'm not aware of what happened before then, and nobody talks about it. So,
yeah, I mean, if that was a set of researchers you want to do, I do know the guy we would probably talk to about it. There's a guy who comes into the radio station here as a pianist and banjo player called Ray Woodley, who plays in trad bands and has been, he remembers the days when there were harmonica bands were the big thing, and there was like a travelling harmonica band that went round the whole of Manawatu with like different sizes of harmonica to play the different parts of the band, all that kind of stuff. Right. So, yeah, but I mean, what we're talking about is there is this very specific scene, and this is an episode where we can kind of get the reservation out of the way quite early, because the thing that is a kind of unifying factor in a lot of it is it's really noisy and
that's right,
confrontational and strange. So if you're into pop and more pop and not really anything that's not that, you're probably going to have a hard time with a lot of it.
The Palmy music scene of the 90s is not for you on that basis. Yeah.
So I guess one place to start would be, where do you think that came from? Because there is really this kind of unifying noisiness to things. Like, if you look at a scene like maybe the Dunedin sound, there's some really weird, noisy, confrontational stuff, but there's also stuff that's like, it's strange, jangly pop, but it's pop. It's not going to make your ears bleed.
In Palmerston North, it was, how would you put it? It was a very dark sort of a rock music. Yeah. And in fact, rock music barely begins to describe it. Some of it was just outside of rock and was almost like performance art. Bands like Meat Market. What did one reviewer in the paper once call them? It sounded like someone slapping a bloated corpse's belly while a harpy wailed over the top, and that was fairly accurate.
Yeah.
I liked it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, what do you think was the impetus behind that? Was it something about Palmy at the time? Or?
Well, Palmerston North's a university town, and back then the arts faculty was still in Palmerston North, and I I think that had a large bearing on things because there were people of an artistic mind that were here. But really what it came down to was just a few personalities at the time who were motivated to get things started. And one would be Dave White, and he got, with others, not exclusively Dave, but with others, although he seemed the prime motivator, he started The Stomach, which obviously still goes as a city council sponsored gig venue, recording studio. Yeah, and he got The Stomach started in 87, I believe, and they started doing 5 bands for $5.
I remember these from being a student in Dunedin. They're a fantastic institution because...
Oh, all right.
Well, I mean, it's just... I
so
think
they had the same thing there with this?
I think it's just kind of a case of great minds think alike, and also 5 bands for $5 is a really easy phrase to say and remember and write on a poster.
Yeah.
And it's very appealing because if you're a student and you have like $20, then you can spend 5 to get in, 3 of the bands can be rubbish and it still doesn't really matter because 2 of them might be good, and you've got $15 left to spend on presumably very cheap beer.
Well, yeah, or probably 3 bottles of wine in the late 80s. That's right. Yeah, you could stash one in the bushes outside.
Exactly.
Yeah. So Dave, and then at a slightly later date and connected to the university, a few other people came in. I would single out Claire Pannell. She was huge. She was the coordinator of The Stomach for a few years. She was always in at least one band. She was very motivated, promotions, you name it. She had her fingers in every pie. And then a guy, Paul Hurst, I would probably single out as well as being a bit of an overachiever in the local music scene. He started the shop Pretty on the Inside, which was a record store, which was very successful. I think the only reason that stopped is because he moved away. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, I mean, it sounds like these people are all getting a fair degree of traction doing this, which is, in the sense that, it was worthwhile to them to keep doing it. People were turning up to gigs.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, attendances back in the late 80s, the early 90s, all through the 90s, in fact, were brilliant. I remember one time, probably around 97, I was in a band Snooze, and we wanted to put on a show. Now, bear in mind, there were maybe 4 or 5 shows a week in Palmerston North at that time, original music. So, there was a lot of competition. And I printed off a pile of flyers that would have been maybe 100 flyers in total. I put them around maybe 5 locations. We got 75 people because, I was counting the money at the end of the night, and that's what it added up to. These days I'm not sure what you would have to do to get 75 people.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's an excellent point. And we'll get onto the next bit in a second. But, I mean, I do think there has been a change in the way that people deal with live music. Because, I don't know that you could put on a bill of original acts somewhere in Palmerston North outside of, say, somewhere like The Stomach or Snails. Snails does a lot of good stuff. But, crowds at Snails are not enormous.
They're not huge, no.
I mean, 75 is not an enormous crowd, but that would pack Snails.
It would.
I don't know how often they would get that.
Oh, probably once a year, I would think.
Yeah.
And the thing that would get you there would be someone with a large online profile, because if I could single out one major change for all of how it is to be in a local amateur rock band, shall we say, I would say the internet has come along and been a disruptor, for good and for ill. In terms of crowd numbers, it's hard to get them off the couch these days because they're on Facebook or whatever. But in terms of being able to promote yourself, further afield, it's brilliant. Yeah.
I mean, I guess it gives people who otherwise would have had to toil away in their local scene an opportunity to kind of explode by accident a bit. Obviously, if you're putting stuff on the internet of yourself performing, then you're doing it on purpose. But, you never know how big anything that you do is going to be.
The other side of that particular dynamic is you get drowned out by all the noise. There's just so much. Where does any given person begin?
Yeah, no, definitely. You're looking for needles in a needle factory.
Yeah,
let alone
that's
haystack.
right. Yeah. For that one special needle that appeals to you. Yeah.
So this is perhaps a point where we can kind of turn to the reason that I'm talking to you in particular about this. You mentioned that you're in this band Snooze.
Yes.
And of course, I recently got handed a bunch of CDs by our mutual friend Eddie, because I ran into him at a memorial for Ross Harkness.
That's right.
And he handed me a bunch of recordings of Ross Harkness projects, and a certain name, Matt Sanko, kept cropping up over and over and over and over again in the personnel. So you were kind of fundamentally tied into this scene.
The key to my ubiquitousness, if that is a word, is that I play the drums.
Yes. Yeah, I was going to say that.
Yeah. And that makes me rather unique in that I stick at it and it's what I want to do. I haven't just drawn the short straw. I actually prefer to play the drums. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like having dedicated bass players as well.
That's right. They're a rare breed. Everyone wants to be the guitar player until they get bumped off to bass. Oh no, the drums.
So, I mean, how did you kind of get an entry into this scene?
Two things spring to mind. One was, in my fifth form year, I was still in uniform, so it must have been probably the fifth form, a local band called Lung, who had quite a high profile, like a national profile of sorts.
Yeah, I remember Lung showing up on, like, someone gave me, this would have been like the early days of ripping CDs, someone gave me like a couple of New Zealand indie music compilations. And I didn't know like the significance of any bands, but the name Lung came up, again and again on those sorts of things.
So Lung played at my school, Queen Elizabeth College. I think they did all the schools at lunchtime, and I saw them and I thought, wow, that's amazing. I was an impressionable young man who was already well into music. And I just thought, they are rock stars, and it didn't matter to me that, they were just the local guys that you could bump into any old where. I just sort of got into that, idolising them as musicians and projected my desire to be in that fold, onto them. And the other thing that stood out was, the council did a series of gigs in the square probably around that time, 88, 89, perhaps a year or two later, and me and my friends went down there with our cheap bottle of wine and no liquor ban in those days, and watched them, and they were a bunch of local bands and lots of people that were, to be huge in the local music scene for the next few years. I mean, there was like Caterpillar Tractor Concept, and we're going to play a track of theirs soon. Earwigs Under Fire, who turned into Feast of Stevens, who then turned into Serotonin, and that's the guitar player for Snooze as well. So you get the picture how interconnected everything is. One Rainy Wish, who became ultimately in the end State of Hate, who was then the guitar player in two of my bands, GMC and Black Chrome. I can't remember the other bands on the day. There were probably 4 or 5, but those are the 3 that really stood out to me. And I just thought, wow, you're amazing. I just want to do that myself. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, I mean, you hinted we're going to play this song, so we might as well do it, and people can hear what you mean by do it yourself. So which one is this that you've picked?
This is a Caterpillar Tractor Concept song with Claire Panel singing. And one of the Hicks brothers playing the bass, and they were all over the music scene too, and it's called Metal Machine Man.
You are on Reserved Recommendations. That was Caterpillar Tractor Concept.
That's them.
Excellent with Metal Machine Man. I was saying while we were listening to that song, the vocal delivery really reminded me of that kind of late 80s, early 90s kind of edge between punk and goth thing. Particularly, there's a band who I didn't realise were from Palmerston North. I bought a Water Damaged CD for like $5 from Echo Records in Dunedin.
Oh, okay.
And it was by the Susans.
Oh, yes.
It was the King of Kings EP, I guess.
I remember them. Yeah.
And they had a very similar, I am a traveller from an ancient land, kind of like very... kind of aggressively gothic thing going on. It was cool. Anyway, you made an interesting point as well, which is that there's a really specific bass sound in that song that comes up over and over again.
Yeah, it's very distorted. It's quite toppy. And it really all boils down to everyone was sharing a bass guitar, and more importantly, everyone was sharing, and I mean everybody was sharing, one Elron amplifier and two Holden quad boxes that pretty much just did everything for about 10 years. Yeah. And that is a large part of the Palmerston North sound, is the crap gear. Yeah.
I mean, that's an interesting point, because, there's a seminal period of Jamaican music, and part of that sound is Lee Scratch Perry manually repairing all of his own effects units because you cannot get parts in Jamaica in 1968 or whenever it was. There's a specific bit of the Dunedin sound, which is everyone was being recorded on Chris Knox's 4-track.
That's right. Yep.
So it is
like boodle, boodle, boodle.
Yeah, that's the one. It's interesting how those like specific local limitations do give a really, really tight focus to things sometimes.
Yeah, well, we all shared the stomach drum kit as well. I can visualise that thing right now, and you would. Of a Friday night or whatever night it was, you would pack up the Stomach's practice room gear, take it down to whichever venue it was, the Wild Horse or Super Liquor Man or wherever it was, and you'd set it up on stage and every band would use it. We thought you were a bit pro if you had your own gear. And at the end of the night, you'd pack it up and take it all back to the Stomach,
And now you mention venues. We can talk a bit about the history of the Stomach as part of that, I suppose, because as you say, it's been around and been a kind of central part of this story for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely it is. Yeah.
But one of the things that has definitely changed between now and then, and I kind of saw it happening in other places when I was a teenager, is the number of venues where you can go and play original music without, having a guaranteed rep and draw and an online following so that you seem like a good bet,
Yeah, back when music venues just had default audiences who would show up and pay their money to see whomever.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the internet is related to that as well, but I don't know. It seems like there's something else going on to me, and I'm not 100% sure what it is.
I would hesitate to blame the internet for the diminishment of audiences. I'm not quite sure. But, I mean, venues here, you had the old booze barn style venues, the Albert, Super Liquor Man, to a lesser extent the Cloverleigh, which still gets used sometimes in that sort of capacity. I think that's where Catch a Fire play, for instance, But they were big, they generally had in-house PAs, and they didn't care for the local bands. We didn't pull big enough audiences, and they were huge. They were designed for, I don't know, like the Angels to come every 18 months, and bands like that. So that was music venues, and then Super Liquor Man moved everyone to the back bar, and it instantly got a lot more right sized to the scale of what was going on. And that was where I came in, was the Super Liquor Man, and that was just down a little side street, and I forget what's the hotel called. I think it's the Railway.
Oh,
these
yeah, no, I
days.
know where you are.
Yeah, and
yep.
it was the very back bar. It was the whole brown Formica, everything painted cream. The carpet smelt like cigarette ash. With the big long ashtray that ran the length of the bar at floor height. It was one of those places.
I was going to say it probably had generations of cigarette ash ground into the
carpet.
carpet.
Oh, absolutely, it did. Yeah.
Pre-World War II, some of it, I imagine.
But everyone would play there.
Yep.
I saw a lot of great bands there, touring bands as well. Like I saw Sticky Filth for the first time there. The bass player was so drunk they literally duct taped him to a pillar next to the stage so he could stand, which stands out in my memory. I saw Head Like a Hole the first time they came to town there. So they did big shows as well. But then, as I said before, local bands were pulling crowds back then. But then that stopped, and I don't know why.
It's fascinating because it has happened in a lot of places, I feel like, and there are places where it hasn't happened as badly, but that's because there are specific, like, nameable individuals in the places that I'm thinking of. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking of the guy who bought the Cook in Dunedin and has changed the name of it and is trying to maintain it specifically as a live original music venue.
Okay.
And that's a single guy who you can point to. Outside of that, I think nationwide it's a bit of a crisis.
Well, and COVID can't be helping with that either.
No. I mean, they'll be making life difficult for the big players as well.
I think people value them. There was that Save Our Venue online, sort of like a Give a Little, but specifically for music venues. That seemed to do a lot of good work. I don't think any of that really applies in Palmerston North because the main venue that a touring band, for instance, would use here, or if you fancy playing at a pub as a local band here, would be the Royal. Yeah. And that exists as a bar independently of live music. With the Royal, that's been a music venue in every bar in that building. Like it has an old lounge bar, a public bar, and I'm not sure what you would call the large area out the back, but they've all at different times and with considerable gaps in the middle too, like maybe 2-3 years where no one played there, in the 90s anyway, have been the music venue for the scene in Palmerston North. Yeah. And then there was the Wild Horse Saloon.
So where was that?
That was in the Maori Battalion Hall.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, on Cuba Street, which in the end became probably its undoing, where, fair enough too, they didn't want it to be a bar, and it was reclaimed and repurposed for something with a bit more mana. Yeah, but for a few years there, it was the Wild Horse Saloon, and we did everything there. We rehearsed in the bar. There was a flat upstairs for which I had keys, and we could just go up there and do as we pleased, and we did. Up to and including staying the night. Gloria, the proprietor, just really, she knew she was onto a winner with us, and all the touring bands started coming there too. It was probably the high point of engagement of the public with Palmerston North's music scene in the 90s. The 75 people for handing out a flyer I mentioned earlier, that happened at the Wild Horse, and probably a large portion of that was because it just had a default audience. Yeah. No, I mean, there's definitely something to be said for that thing where there are just people who will show up for everything, and that's I certainly remember having that attitude when I was at kind of peak going out age, which would have been like, for me, that would have been sort of 98, 99-ish, there is a place that you will be going because it is the place that you go. That's right.
And you'll go and see whatever's happening there.
It was the Wild Horse, for 3 or 4 years.
Yeah. In Dunedin, it was Arc Cafe, which was a non-profit collective run by hippies for the betterment of the artistic community.
Oh, all right.
And was, as a result, an unmitigated disaster at the end because hippies cannot be trusted with literally anything. As someone who aspired to be a hippie at the time, it was a terrible idea. But while it was functional, it was a great place to go. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. The Wild Horse was fantastic. And again, international touring bands came there. There was a guy from New Plymouth, Brian Wafer, who I think every time he went bankrupt, he just changed the name of his touring company, and he was bringing so many bands. I saw a bunch of brilliant international bands there, and bands that went on to be huge. In fact, the most notable example of that very dynamic happened at Harvesters, which was in the Square Edge building, and that was our venue for a while. Believe it or not, the whole scene happened on a Wednesday night, because that was all we could get at that time.
That's very bold to assume that people are willing to be non-functional on a Thursday morning.
Sort of 99, 2000, we were without anything.
Yeah.
It all happened at Harvesters on a Wednesday. I saw the White Stripes.
Oh, holy shit.
At Harvesters.
Cool.
Yeah. Like talking to them before and after. They had no profile as celebrities then. Seven Nation Army hadn't happened. And, they were just another band. They were very good. Yeah. But, that's probably the most notable example of that particular dynamic.
Fantastic. All right, well, look, we are hitting around about the halfway point. So what we might do is we might play another song and then take a break and come back after the song and the break and keep talking. You are on Reserved Recommendations, and I am talking to Matt Sanko about the history of the Palmerston North music scene. What do we got lined up next?
Okay, we got a Foy's Master track. Now, this is from an album we did, when did we record this? 97? And the track is Bulldozer to Butterfly.
All right, here we go.
The dwellers at the Temple Headland.
support this show and others like it by giving a donation. For more information, go to www.mpr.nz/donate.
And we're back on Manawatu People's Radio today, o Irirangi o ngā tangata o Manawatu. This is Reserved Recommendations, which is a show about difficult art and great trash. Before the break, we were listening to Foy's Master with yourself, Matt, on the drums.
That's right, yeah.
And I recognised the discordant saxophone of Stuart Hubbard, who station listeners will know because we have a lot of the Bing Turkby ensemble on the radio, and he's all over their stuff.
Oh, okay, yes, that's right. Yeah, Stuart joined the band during the recording of that album, yeah.
So one of the things that you were saying, and of course the other kind of central bit of Foy's Master is the inimitable Ross Harkness, who fairly recently passed.
That's right.
And so lots of people around this neck of the woods have been remembering Ross lately. He made a show here for a while. And I went along to his memorial and told people that, and they said, "Oh, well, you got mellow, Ross. Let us tell you about Ross's radio shows of days gone by." And
yeah, that's right. They were notorious events. Yeah. Lots of misbehaving, basically. Yeah. I pity the poor technician that had to repair the gear after he'd finished with it. Yeah.
I mean, I think art often has an element of misbehaviour to it, because there's, particularly when you're doing music that sounds like what we were listening to before the break, there's an element of what can we get away with here? How far can we push this thing before it becomes unfeasible to do?
Yeah, okay. Well, I think with regards to Foy's Master, the pushing the envelope thing, the song probably sounded full on to a lot of people's ears, but really we pushed the envelope live. The volume, the presence of Ross and the other guys at the front, the sort of getting involved with the audience. Like Ross had a Jansen electric piano, and it was a big heavy thing. And he would pick it up and just sort of wander into the audience, sort of mashing the keys with his fist, and literally dragging people in so they could too mash the keys as well, and it just became this big sweaty, sort of shaken all over type thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that is a key part of those kind of spontaneous grassroots kind of music scenes, is that willingness and ability to get into the audience like that and have that level of vulnerability. Because, I mean, I'm sure that Ross was in some ways intimidating by doing that, but he's also making himself vulnerable.
Absolutely.
People could take shots at him and he wouldn't really be able to stop them if he's carrying an electric piano.
Yeah, that's right. I think you got a mixture of reactions. Some people were definitely confronted by it, and they would generally back into the walls and the corners or simply leave. Other people would lap it up.
Yeah.
And engage. And Foy's Master is one of the only bands I know where the invitation to strum the guitar was always there, and was welcomed, because with regards to the guitar, and actually all of Ross's, he was like painting Jackson Pollocks, with sound, while the rest of us were sort of trying to move things along a little more traditionally. But it worked. I mean, again, I'm the drummer, so, any old noise you can play drums to, basically, and I've always had that attitude where I could play the drums to anything, and in Foy's Master that was definitely challenged at times. But yeah, we were pretty full on live. Yeah.
Excellent. Now, the thing that you were talking about as far as another track to play was kind of talking about the generational shift in the way that things moved. And I think that probably is a vital part of talking about a scene like this, because it is, after all, a university scene.
Yeah.
And so Well,
to some extent.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, while there are some people like Stuart still around, if you want to see Stuart, you can go and wander around the library long enough and you'll find him.
Yeah.
Because he's still here. He still works around town. He still plays in bands.
That's right. Yeah.
but a lot of people come in for their 4 years or their 3 years, depending on the degree, and then they're out again.
That's right, and there are many bands that have been built from those people, although less these days because we do not have the art faculty here anymore. It's in Wellington. But yeah, there was that. That was one way that because I suppose a popular music generation is maybe 5 years. It's not like a 25-year thing with into the normal generations. It's a 5-year thing perhaps. The other source of would be people moving from their high school to their flats, their first flats as a group of friends, and they would start a band. And I mean, there's still people around that I can think of who that was their dynamic. The guys that did Pro Drag All Stars all arrived as a group from, what's the high school? Tararua College.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah, and they're still all active musicians. Dylan runs a label called Stink Magnetic and does a bunch of bands. I'm in a band with Willie, who's one of them, our current band, Old Man Pine. You know, and those guys were, what's Willie? He'd be 6 or 7 years younger than me. So I felt like an old hand when they showed up. And my friend Adam released a tape of theirs. Now, what was their band called? Ooh. But, you know, he got them their start as recording musicians with you know, they didn't have to put any money in. It would have been quite liberating for them, I'm sure, you know, just to get that attention and, you know, have a cassette put out on their behalf. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's the drug, isn't it? That's what makes it worth, as a musician, rolling the dice and maybe having to play some gigs to rooms of empty people, like, you know, completely empty of people, or hump bass amps around God knows where, or whatever else you have to do. It's the chance to kind of stand up and be in front of people and be kind of the centre of attention.
That's right.
For people.
Yeah, it's ego driven. Yeah, perhaps less so as you get older, but certainly when you're young, it is totally an ego driven thing. Yeah.
Well, I mean, talking about the kind of loss of ego as you get older, I guess that's an interesting thing that you just kind of mentioned, is that you were sort of an old hand by the time these guys came around, but you were still in their band as a drummer, and drummers are a commodity. You know, you find a good one and you fucking hang on to them and you give them whatever they want. Yeah. Particularly in a scene the size of Palmerston North, I imagine. And similarly, you know, people who had their admittedly not like super giant record labels, but record labels were, you know, yeah, come on, we'll put you on a tape, or, you know. Oh, yeah.
Well, there were a few record labels. There was Yellow Bike, which was run pretty much out of the stomach by Dave White. There was Lizard Mull, which was run by a guy called Adam Candy, pretty much just out of his lounge. And that he bought a machine that could dub. It was like a bank of tape decks, but all built into one machine, so he could like put your master on and then make 10 tapes at a time, and he'd go down to the local print shop and print off a bunch of coloured cardboard covers, and we'd fold them up together and cut them out together and like all put them and package them. And a lot of them still around. And he had a huge roster too. I don't know how many releases, but I remember number 25 coming out. You know, one after the other, probably every couple of months there would be a new release. There was always something happening there. He eventually shifted to putting out LPs, but I think the huge cost of that,
I was going to say,
sort of destroyed him.
That's actually probably another factor that we've kind of skipped over, is that you know, what we've been listening to today on the show has all been CDs, but actually this is kind of prime cassette period.
Oh, absolutely.
And for all of their many flaws, cassettes are super easy to duplicate.
Yeah.
You know, I could do that on a ghetto blaster that I was given as a birthday present when I was 10, which continued working until I was 25. So
well, the Voice Master track that we listened to a while ago, though it's out on a CD album, was actually mastered to cassette.
Yep. Yeah. Yep, I'd believe it.
Yeah.
And there were all of those early Porter Studios that would get consumer cassette tapes.
That's right.
And turn them into 4-tracks.
That was another part of the business model. I'm doing the inverted commas thing
the finger quotes.
of Lizard Mull was he owned a 4-track.
Yeah.
So there's your recording studio. Here's the mastering process. I'll sort everything out. You just get creative. I mean, we had a really great hardcore band here called State of Hate. They probably did 4 albums. Like John Hicks was and Graham Slimmin were the main guys there, and I was in bands with both of them at different times. But everything they did came out on cassette. I think there's a track here somewhere in my pile of CDs of theirs on a compilation on CD, but essentially they are lost to history unless you've got a copy of the cassette, and I've one.
And I mean, that's dangerous as well, because one of the many flaws of cassettes is that they are not safe or static media.
Yeah.
If you don't play them a certain number, every so often they'll print through. If you do play them, then every time you do it, you're wearing the oxide off the tape and you stretch it and you warp it. So, that's kind of dangerous, actually.
Oh, there's a whole lost history of the bands from this town. Unlike Dunedin, the example you can use, Palmy bands never had a profile particularly nationally. I can only think of 2 national tours that emanated from Palmerston North original bands in that time. One was when Rake, I'm getting that in the wrong order, when Lung took Rake around nationwide. And Lung were a particular case. I mean, they toured the United States twice. They completely wore out a van, by doing that, So they're unusual. And the only other one I can think of is a band I was in, Blunt, and a band that Claire Panel had, Freudhead, did a national tour, organised by Claire, of course, not by us. But those are the only 2. So we didn't have national profiles. So it's this whole history that it only exists in the people that were theirs memories, and there's a few cultural artefacts, cassettes, CDs, very little on vinyl.
Although, I mean, the thing that I've been finding is that as I kind of find contemporary institutions and hear contemporary people and their work, you're listening to people who came through that scene. As I say, Stuart Hubbard is kind of everywhere that a sax player could get to. And the Stomach is still a going concern. It still does all of the things that the Stomach does, albeit I imagine somewhat more tightly controlled in terms of letting their drum kits disappear in the middle of the night.
That's right. Well, the whole thing's got a lot more respectable these days. We used to shut the door after gigs and have parties. I used to sleep in the studio some nights. After the booked, whoever was in there recording or rehearsing was finished for the day, we used to go in and record during the night. We practically lived there. Yeah, and you couldn't do that these days.
No, I mean, do you think that lack of supervision is something that was kind of vital to what was going on? I mean, it sounds
absolutely
like there was a fair bit of that with what you're talking about at the Wild Horse as well. Is that there's this space that you've kind of been given license to do what you like with?
That's right. Yeah, it was. Everything's a bit more gentrified these days. And I think Palmy was a low rent town, so costs were far lower than they are these days.
Yeah, look, yeah. I think that is a thing that comes up over and over and over again. If you read books on the psychedelic rock explosion in America, low rent was vital.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's why I Hate Ashbury, is because low rent.
Yeah, well, who lives there these days that's in a band? They probably don't.
No, definitely. Yeah. That was why. I
mean, look at the Bowery in New York. It's all like $1 million loft spaces these days.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think Dunedin is a special case because it's very much a university town, and so like the number of absolute fucking mouldy dives being hocked off as student accommodation does keep the rent low, even though it's probably poisoning generations of people
Yeah.
with lung disease and God knows what. But I mean, there is that element of low rent. But Palmy's, it's not as easy to live here as it was.
Oh, certainly not. My first room when I left home was $15 a week.
Holy shit.
I am not exaggerating. Yeah. And we had whole flats that were, I don't know, $75, $80 a week for the entire house. So people thrived on that. And then you've got like I was describing with Lizard Mole, the pretty much free model of how to get your music out there, combined with the ultra low cost model that the Stomach ran for recording, if you were going to record something a bit more salubrious, and for rehearsing. I mean, we can't underplay the importance of the rehearsal spaces.
Oh no, damn straight.
Yeah.
Like that, and that is a thing which is an issue in Dunedin. Like it kills bands still, because you can't have a loud rock band in your bedroom in your flat because you're in the middle of a residential neighbourhood and you'll get all of your stuff taken.
Every band I've been in for the last 20 years, we've had our own rehearsal space, and that is vital. Like Black Chrome, for instance, had one on Queen Street in a building that's now been removed for a car park. But we had the entire top floor of the building. There were maybe 3 guys living there. We had this, it was an old youth hostel. So we had this enormous hostel space for our band room. We had that for 3 or 4 years at least. I'm not sure you can do that now.
No, I don't think that rents would permit it, to be honest. I don't think that the market would allow that much space to be given over to people doing nothing but annoying the neighbours when you could put like expensive apartments in.
Another popular option was renting a derelict shop. Mm-hmm. So the sort of Cuba Street, where Harvey Norman is now, was all really old, mouldy old shops. And you could just rent one. We're talking $20, $30 a week.
Wow.
You just hang a sheet in the window to give privacy, live there, rehearse there. Yeah.
Well, shall we have that next track that you were going to talk about?
Yeah, that represents generational change. Yeah, so the generations come and go. These guys were called Cathedra. I only know one of them these days, and that's Te Rā Moriarty, who works out at Massey as a lecturer. But Cathedra were incredible, and they represent the parallel sort of heavy metal scene that ran along concurrently with the noisy freak scene of Palmerston North, and everyone used to gig together because you really didn't have a choice. If you didn't all club together, regardless of musical style, you weren't going to have a bill. It's as simple as that. What are you going to do? Imagine that there's some scene you can tap into for bands like you. That's not how it worked. Yeah. So this is Cathedra. And the song is called The Executioner.
You're on Reserved Recommendations. That was Cathedra with The Executioner.
Yes, that's it.
Excellent. When people bring in the music, I always have to make sure I remember stuff. Remembering things is a problem. I'm talking to Matt Sanko about the Palmerston North music scene in the 90s, largely, of which he was a major participant. And we are pretty close to the end of time. So there are two things I like to do to wrap things up. The last is to get you to plug your shit, which we will do by way of a final song very shortly.
Indeed.
The first is do you have any other recommendations? Like, if you like this stuff, check out other things. I was going to say one of the kind of recurring themes of this conversation is that there was a lot of stuff that came together to facilitate people making music like this that was definitely not going to be immediately commercial. It might draw an audience that was super into it, but you're not going to be an instant radio hit. So, I guess if you're a landlord, lower your rent. That kind of stuff. Help people where you can, I guess.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is a lot more difficult to be in an amateur rock band these days.
Yeah, for sure. Which I guess leads us to the final point, which is that you are still in an amateur rock band.
Yeah, plugging away at it. Yeah,
and I just got sent a single by Jay, who I think does he guitar or bass?
He's our bass player.
He goes back and forth, so I can never remember which he is in which band. He just sent me through the single, the Drag Pack BC.
That's the one, and that's actually what I've given you to play as well.
So do you want to maybe talk a wee bit quickly about Old Man Pine and where things are at now?
Okay, well, Old Man Pine is myself and Willie Mackay and Jay McMurray, and we've all been in bands in Palmy since the 90s. This is our current effort. I think it's one of the better things I've ever done. We bring a bunch of stuff together that, on one level we're a punk band, on another level, we use a lot of roots music sort of tropes, especially with the guitar, folk and blues and jazz. Willie's been to jazz school. That's us, Old Man Pine.
Excellent. Well, here we go. We'll finish things off with Old Man Pine with Drag Pack BC. Thank you very much for coming and talking.
Thanks for talking to me, Hugh.
You've been listening to Reserved Recommendations, a radio show and podcast from Manawatu People's Radio, Te Reo Irirangi o ngā tangata o Manawatu. The show is produced and presented by me, Hugh Dingwall, and I also composed our theme music. It's called Sack Jazz, and you can find it at wolfboy.bandcamp.com. You can find me on the internet at Objective Realty on Twitter, and you can find the show on Facebook under Reserved Recommendations. If you've got a reserved recommendation of your own, feel free to pitch it to me in either of those two places. And if you enjoyed the show, why not go ahead and recommend it to a friend? You can find past episodes at www.mpr.nz/show/reserved on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And remember, Manawatu People's Radio is a non-profit radio station. If you enjoy this or any of their other fine audio programming, why not fling them a couple of dollars? Go to mpr.nz/donate for more information.